Hey adventurers, today is going to be a special video. It's today, March 25th, is what is known as Tolkien Reading Day. So for this Tolkien Reading Day, I decided to do a video about Faramir. I actually was talking a while back now. It's been, I don't remember how long it's been, but it's been a while since I was having this conversation. But I was talking to Joanna from the channel of the same name, and I mentioned something about doing a video about Faramir, and she said that she wanted me to do it. So this video is a Faramir character study, and I'm really excited to do this. Faramir is one of the characters from The Lord of the Rings that I've really loved, and he's just a very unique character. So we'll see how this video goes. When I was writing this video, I went through, and anytime he was talking or someone was talking about him, I wrote it down so that I could have a record of basically how people react and respond to this character. Then after that, what I did is I took those moments and put them into various different subheadings to kind of try and get a better taste of who this character is. So we'll get right into it. When we first meet him, he's introduced as a tall man clad in greens and browns with all but the eyes masked. We don't know much about him, but Frodo is reminded of Boromir, and we learn much about him as the story goes. We don't know much about him other than that he's clad in greens and browns with all but his eyes masked, and that he reminds Frodo of Boromir. That's literally all we know about him when we first meet him. But as you get to know him a little bit better, you start picking up on some certain aspects of him. So the first point that I decided to put for this character study is that he's respectful and professional. As pretty much anything you'll see about him, he's very respectful in the way he treats other people and professional in the way he treats people and does his job. So Faramir introduces himself as Faramir, Captain of Gondor. He doesn't say anything about being the son of the steward or anything else. He uses the title that at the moment in time when we first meet him is the title that defines him the most. He does not want undue recognition. So he doesn't want to be like, yeah, I'm the steward, or I'm the son of the steward, so you need to pay me respect. No, he's going to use the title of I'm Captain of Gondor. That's what you will refer to me as. That's what you'll treat me as in this moment. Later on, he takes up different roles, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So he starts off talking about Boromir as this great, respected general that is sorely missed by the forces of Gondor, and he's very professional in speech. Even still, he hasn't revealed yet that he is the brother of Boromir, which would then change the opinion of Frodo and Sam on Faramir. They get to know him better because he doesn't introduce himself as Boromir's brother to start with. But even in that, he knows the faults and failings of Boromir, but he still speaks of him with great respect and love and admiration, as he should, being his brother. A little bit later, we see Denethor saying, I sent my son forth, unthanked, unblessed, out into needless peril, and here he lies with poison in his veins. Faramir would do his duty no matter what people thought of him. He knew that his father preferred Boromir, and so even in that, he knew what his duty was, and he was willing to do that duty even though he knew it might end badly for himself. When it comes to meeting Éowyn and getting to know Éowyn, he comes to love her unconditionally and not pity her. So there's a moment where Éowyn says to him something along the lines of, I do not want your pity, and he comes to respect that wish. At first, when he first met her, he pitied her, but after he's gotten to know her, he realizes, no, she doesn't deserve or need my pity. She needs my respect. And then because there's no reason, or because she does not need his pity, there's no reason for him to give it. He's also very wise in seeing and understanding Éowyn's heart in this matter, and then even when Éowyn doesn't fully understand it herself, which this actually ties directly into my next point, which is the wisdom of Faramir. So again, we'll just kind of go over the points that I categorized under this subheading, and that's Frodo felt in his heart that Faramir, though he was much like his brother in looks, was a man less self-regarding, both sterner and wiser. That is a quote directly from the book. I didn't write the page number down or anything, but that's a quote directly from the book. So Frodo could see that although he physically looked like Boromir, there was a different side to him that Boromir didn't have, and that was that both sterner and wiser. Faramir had an understanding that Isildur's bane was not to be discussed openly among many men, and thus changed the subject to Boromir, but he also knew that Frodo was not wholly frank with him. So there's this moment when they are traveling through Ithilien under the guard of Faramir and the other knights in Ithilien. And so Faramir is kind of interrogating, trying to get some answers from Frodo and Sam as to why they're there and what they're doing. And the topic comes up of Isildur's Bane based on the fact that they know the riddle of Boromir, as it's called, where it mentions Isildur's Bane. But as they're talking about it, and Frodo's purposely trying to stay away from that topic, Faramir sees that the wisdom in staying away from this. This is not for the ears of the average person, although they're probably mostly trustworthy. Still best to keep that knowledge and that conversation for a time and place where it's a little bit more secret. Again, Faramir is not satisfied with Frodo's account as he's telling them the story of their journey from Imladris to now Ithilien, and he keeps wishing to know more about Isildur's Bane, and guesses that Isildur's Bane was the same thing as that which Isildur took from the hand of Sauron, though he didn't know what that was. He was wise enough to read more into Frodo's words than just what was said. He understands the danger of a mighty heirloom, and the contentions it breeds. He also understood his brother's attitude and personality. This more brash but very strong-willed man who was a great leader and a great warrior, but also was less mindful of his actions in many ways. He also knows much of the ancient lore. He was basically tutored for a while by Gandalf, and he says, "I learned a little of him when he would teach." He has a hunger for knowledge and lore, and that studying under Gandalf gave him a lot of information and helped him to learn a lot of knowledge and wisdom and lore, which is how he becomes partly the character that he is at this point in the book. Sam says that Faramir has an air that reminds him of Gandalf and wizards. That's on page 682 of this book that I have, which is very similar, very close to where you would find it on the other books in any of the other editions. Faramir is also thoughtful. There's many times when it says something along the lines of Faramir sat for a moment and thought. He doesn't make decisions rashly or hastily. He sits and thinks about them and thinks about the consequences of what they would lead to and how they would do. He's also an excellent judge of character, as we see throughout the books, throughout book 2 and 3, part 2 and 3. He makes a decision based on what he knows of Frodo and Sam that turns out to be a very good decision, but he also understands that as much as they are required to follow Gollum, it's not a good choice. But he also listens to the wisdom and the counsel of others. He listens to Aragorn, and he listens to the Warden of the Houses of Healing. Those are two of the most prominent moments of seeing this aspect of him, is how he listens to the wisdom and is willing to hearken and hear the wisdom of other people. And he does make the decision for himself, but he listens to that wisdom and then makes that decision based on his own thoughts and his own knowledge and understanding of certain aspects, certain things. An aspect that I put under the subheading of the Wisdom of Faramir is that Faramir is shown a vision of Boromir in a boat, showing that he will understand what it means. So when he sees the vision of Boromir, a lot of people wouldn't know what to do with that, but being learned in the lore and the wisdom of the White Tower, he was able to understand a little bit about what this vision could mean, whether it was a vision or a dream or just something because Boromir's his brother and Boromir would have been always on his mind at that point. And so it was being able to differentiate that shows more of his wisdom. Then we get into the Trust of Faramir. After hearing Frodo's tale and how it lined up with his vision, Faramir doubts Frodo no more. He realizes, okay, I have seen this vision of Boromir in a boat, but also, now that I've heard the entire tale of Frodo, it seems to fit and seems to line up with everything that I saw in that vision, so maybe it's true. And so he thereby, based on what he has seen and what he knows, can then take the story and say, yeah, the pieces fit together. He accepts Boromir's riddle from Frodo as proof that they did indeed know him. He leaves them when Frodo tells them that they know the riddle of Boromir. When Faramir finds out that Frodo knows Boromir's riddle, it helps him to trust that they are indeed who they say they are and that they did indeed know Boromir, because of course how else would they have heard that riddle when nobody but Denethor, Faramir, and Boromir presumably knew it. He also leaves guards with him saying, "For your good or mine." He does not fully trust random travelers, but he is willing to allow them the opportunity to gain his trust. He's willing to trust, but only after given reason to. He also then, you see him later speaking openly with Éowyn, meaning he has grown to trust Éowyn in a way that he doesn't really trust a whole lot of other people. The next point is courteous, full of integrity. So he's a man that, while he's got these various other aspects to him, wisdom and trust and respect and professionalism, he's also courteous and full of integrity. There's a moment where he says, "I would not snare even an orc with a falsehood." That's a quote directly from Faramir, from the book. But this desire to always be true, not to trick somebody with something that's false into telling them a lie or telling them something that is wrong for whatever reason. He'd rather take this opportunity to show his integrity and, okay, this is an orc, that's all right. I'm not going to trick them. I'm going to treat them like a created being. Whether or not orcs are created beings is a different discussion altogether. He's also willing to ask forgiveness. There's times when he goes against his father's will, but instead of being like, "I did what I did, I don't care," he actually asks forgiveness for that. Even though technically it was the right decision, he still asks for forgiveness because he knows it's the right thing to do, because it's his father, and because his father is the steward of Gondor. He tries in all things to be courteous. There's just as you're reading through the story, you see his respect for people and his courteousness in the way that he speaks of them, in the way that he speaks to them, all that kind of stuff. He also is never seen to lose his temper. There's not a time in the books where he's a warrior, absolutely, but he also isn't. He's willing to be thoughtful and take time to think before he reacts, and so he never loses his temper in that because of that. There's also the famous line about him loving the sword not for its sharp edge or whatever, but because of that which it protects. And that's another, I didn't write it down and I should have, but that's another quote that shows his integrity. Then we get into some descriptions of his character. The first descriptions that we see are Mablung and Damrod saying that Faramir's life is charmed or fate spares him for some other end. As you continue through the book, that you see that indeed is the case, that he is spared for some other end, which we don't see that end, but there's a specific thing that he is supposed to do and that he is required to do later in the book. And so we see that part. On page 67, Faramir is speaking, or 671, sorry, on page 671, Faramir is speaking, and it says, "But fear no more, I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway. Not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her so, using the weapon of the Dark Lord for good and my glory. No, I do not wish for such triumphs." On page 681, he also continues talking about that. On page 681, he is talking more about the ring. I didn't write down exactly where it was at or what he says, but it's on that page in, again, this copy. Gandalf, speaking of Denethor and through what he's saying about Faramir, says, "By some chance the blood of Westerness runs nearly true in him, as it does in his other son Faramir." So he's of course speaking of Denethor being the him, but his other son Faramir is of course Faramir. The last paragraph on page 766 is another description of the character of Faramir. This is from Baragon's perspective. "But things may change when Faramir returns. He is bold, more bold than many deem, for in these days men are slow to believe that a captain can be wise and learned in the scrolls of lore and song, and he is, and yet a man of hardihood and swift judgment in the field. But such is Faramir, less reckless and eager than Boromir, but not less resolute." That's Baragon's perspective on Faramir, which as we continue going, we see a little bit more of the same perspective. So on pages 810 and 811, which would be the last paragraph of 810 that goes over onto 811, Pippin is talking and gives his perspective on Faramir. It says, "And when he saw the pale face of Faramir, he caught his breath. It was the face of one who had been assailed by a great fear or anguish, but has mastered it, and now is quiet. Proud and grave he stood for a moment, and as he spoke to the guard, and Pippin gazing at him, saw how closely he resembled his brother Boromir, whom Pippin had liked from the first, admiring the great man's lordly but kindly manner. Yet suddenly for Faramir his heart was strangely moved with the feeling that he had not known. Here was one with an air of high nobility, such as Aragorn at times revealed. Less high perhaps, yet also less incalculable and remote. One of the kings of men born into the later time, but touched with the wisdom and sadness of the elder race. He knew now why Baragon spoke his name with love. He was the captain that men would follow, and that he would follow even under the shadow of the Black Wings. And then on page 813 is a description, or he's described from Denethor's perspective. Let's see if I can find that, since I didn't write exactly where that was at. "Would you have availed to change your judgment?" said Denethor. "You would still have done just so, I deem. I know you well. Even your desire is to appear lordly and generous as a king of old, gracious, gentle. That may well befit one of high race if he sits in power and peace, but in desperate hours gentleness may be repaid with death." So even with this frustrated, nasty version that Denethor tries to see in his son, he still sees the goodness in him, or what he thinks. What he sees is not what's truly there, but it still gives this air of nobility, and is the same thing in many ways of what Pippin saw, in that air of nobility that most men don't have anymore. There's also many times where it says he can master both beasts and men, or he may perhaps hold his men together long enough, but I doubt it, and then he can govern man and beast. So these are other people describing his characteristics and his ability in battle and in among men and among people, or among men and among animals, that is different and more powerful than many other people have. And then this last point is he has no love or desire for power. Again, I've kind of talked about that with the whole ring thing, where he talks about how if it were laying by the road and I saw it there and Minas Tirith was in dire need, I still wouldn't take it, because it's not my power to wield, it's the Dark Lord's, and by doing it, by taking it, it would corrupt me. And so he has no desire for that power, but he willingly takes up the position of steward in preparation for Aragorn, and then willingly relinquishes that power to Aragorn as soon as Aragorn comes in as king. But when Aragorn tells him to keep it and continue that job, he does so without question or protest. He's like, okay, I understand that I am still the steward, or I am still the steward's son, and so I will take this position because it's the position that my family has held, and it needs to still hold because you've told me to. As king, you've told me to take it, and so I will take it. He also on page 671 says, "But fear no more, I would not take this ring if it lay by the highway." Again, here's that thing that I was mentioning. "Not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her. So, using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory. No, I do not wish for such triumphs." So there's that moment that I mentioned where he doesn't want the ring, doesn't want that power for himself. There's also another moment where he says, "I do not slay man or beast needlessly, and not even gladly when it is needed. Neither do I talk in vain." Again, showing his wisdom, but also showing he has no love or desire for power. He doesn't want to kill people just to kill people. He doesn't even want to kill them when he has to, but he will do what he has to in order for the duty of his realm to be achieved. And on 689, he says, "However, that is not for me to judge, happily." This is talking about whether or not he's made the right decision in letting Frodo and Sam go. But it's just another moment of showing how he does not like having power, and he does not like being forced to judge whether something is right or wrong. He just wants to, he'll do it if he has to, but he doesn't like that responsibility. So through all these different aspects, we see how great of a character Faramir is, and how as he doesn't get as much screen time or page time as a lot of other characters, but we still, if you look a little bit into the things that are said about him, and you look a little bit into the way that he acts and reacts to things, you can learn a lot about his character, about all these different points. I'll just read through them again real quick, but he's respectful and professional. There's the wisdom of Faramir, there's the trust of Faramir. He's courteous and full of integrity, and he has no love or desire for power. And then that mixed with the various descriptions of his character just really inform this fully developed character with a rich background and rich history, but also a personality that makes sense and is believable for any character to have. He does in many ways and many times seem like a perfect person, but that's not the case. He's learned so much under the tutelage of Gandalf, and just from life and from watching his father and his brother, and he's learned so much, and he's learned how to act and how to best act in many situations. So Faramir is like I mentioned at the beginning, he's one of my favorite characters from The Lord of the Rings. The movies don't fully do him justice. The movies don't fully do anything justice, but I do like the way that he was portrayed, mostly other than the one time in the movies where he loses his temper, which again I made at a point to show you that no, he never loses his temper in the books. You don't see that. That's not part of his character. He is very thoughtful and very precise in the way that he acts and thinks and the actions that he does. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you guys had a great Tolkien reading day. We post videos every Monday and Thursday, unless it's some special occasion like this one. We have our social medias linked in the description down below, and we'll see you guys again soon. Thanks for watching. Stay warm.